So I have a debatable topic, something that's basically been on my mind like my whole adult life. It's just something that I've felt, and I've always felt scared to admit it or bring it up because I don't know, I feel like it's kind of like a polarizing topic. And it's the differences, just the fundamental differences between men and women when it comes to intimacy. What intimacy is, for the most part, is different for men and is different for women. And there's always going to be outliers. There's always going to be the minorities, but I'm speaking majority here. For the majority, intimacy means something different for men and women. In regards to women, it is my belief that when it comes to sex and intimacy, there is way more emotion involved. There's way more emotional connection involved that needs to happen for women in regards to sex and intimacy. When it comes to men, I believe when it comes to sex and intimacy, it is physical. Men see something, makes their dick move, they want to fuck it. I think physical attraction has way more to do with sex and intimacy in men, for the most part, than it does for women. I think for sex and intimacy, when it comes to women, there's a lot more emotional attachment that needs to be involved. Why do you think that strip clubs have so much more appeal and pull and power to men than it does women? Because we are visual creatures. We see something, it makes our dick move, we want to fuck it. I think that's why there are so many problems in relationships. People get divorced, they split up, because we don't identify these differences in men and women. For example, you take the classic man complaining because he doesn't get laid enough. When's the last time you got laid? I don't get laid enough. Or even in extreme measures, men wander out of relationships or there's infidelity because they aren't getting laid enough. Or you have the flip side. Women are complaining because they are not having enough sex. They are not getting enough physical intimacy. They leave the relationship. There's infidelity. Each of these situations, somebody is not fulfilling a need, fulfilling a role, fulfilling something that is necessary to the other person. If let's go, for example, in the case of the man who's complaining because they don't get laid enough. I'm willing to bet a paycheck that in any of those relationships where there's not as much sex going on, it is because the man is not emotionally available. The man is emotionally frigid, pent up, no emotions. There's no emotional connection with the woman. There's no intimacy with the woman as far as emotions in expressing your emotions, but also allowing the wife to express her emotions and to have an emotional connection. You just got your typical man who's cold, doesn't want to talk about feelings, isn't into, cuddling or physical or emotional shows of emotions. And all those things, in my opinion, are extremely important for women to build a connection with their mate. And then you have the flip side. You have the woman in the relationship who complains that there's no sex in the relationship, there's no connection, there's no anything, but they have gotten physically more unattractive since the beginning of the relationship, whether it is they've put on weight, they make no attempt anymore to be physically attractive. You know, they know that, you know, now they're in the relationship, they're married, they're not going anywhere. They kind of take for granted the physical attraction part of the relationship. And same vice versa. You know, a man, you know, no longer has to try emotionally, has no reason to be available emotionally or try to create connections or cater to the needs emotionally of their female counterpart. Both sides interpret intimacy completely different, in my opinion. And the majority of life, when you meet your partner, there's just compromise. You know what I mean? You're never, or very rarely, are you going to meet somebody that both sides, men and women, their needs are being fulfilled. You know, women will have to compromise with, you know, being emotionally available, their man being emotionally available. They might have to compromise. They might not be getting as much as they would like. Men compromise on physical attraction. You know what I mean? They might be with somebody that they are not completely 100% physically attracted to. They don't fulfill their needs in that aspect. So there's always a level of compromise when you find the person that you inevitably end up with. And people fall into these traps to where they expect, you know, 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line that this compromise isn't going to bother them at some point. Whether that be 5, 10, 15 years down the line, eventually that compromise is going to get to that person if they're not willing to accept the fact that it is a compromise. And they're going to expect the other person to have to change. Whether it be the man who is not getting laid enough, he is going to expect the woman to just put out more instead of, or just find a way for her to put out more or to present herself more in a sexual way, be available for him sexually, instead of him changing something as far as being more emotionally intimate with the female, which in turn would present a lot more attraction to that female and more sex would happen. And the flip side, if you have the female in the relationship who complains about never getting enough sex, never getting enough intimacy, they are going to expect the man to change when the problem lies in the fact that they let themselves go, or physical attraction or being physically sexy to their mate has no longer become a priority. And I honestly feel that there's these fundamental differences between men and women at our core. You know what I mean? We're men, we are visual creatures. We see something that's appealing, we want it. Women are emotional creatures. They feel something that they love and they go after it. And I'm not saying at all that if a woman wants to be loved, she needs to be hot. And I'm not saying if a man wants to be loved, he needs to be completely emotionally available and an open book and be ready to cry and talk about his feelings on a daily basis. If that's what you take out of this, you're not listening to me. But there has to be compromise, you know, for a man and a woman to choose one person to be with for the rest of their lives. Is that really realistic in terms of how we evolved? You know, just evolving as a species, we're here to populate, spread our seed, keep the species going. And to think that we are going to spend the rest of our lives with one person and not encounter any issues is completely unrealistic. And I think that's where, divorce rates are so high. Domestic abuse, both from men and from women on the other, are just so high because we expect that we are going to embark on this monogamous relationship for the rest of our lives, and it is not going to require work or compromise or very painful self-reflection that, what we've become is no longer acceptable and we need to change to satisfy our mate, going both ways, men and women. And I think it's really frustrating that it is okay for a woman to tell a man, you are not emotionally available enough for me. You need to do better. You need to be able to cry. You need to be able to talk to me about feelings. You just need to be more emotionally available. You need to be able to talk to me on a daily basis about feelings and how they pertain to the woman and to the man. I don't like how it's okay for the female to say, you are not good enough. You need to go change. And that has become socially acceptable for the female to say, you're not good enough. You need to go change to fulfill my needs. But if a man were to say to his wife, you've put on some weight, you don't really care, there's no effort made to be physically attractive anymore, my needs are not being met. If a man were to say that, oh my God, he's a chauvinistic pig. He's he's an asshole. He's this unsensitive prick. It's unrealistic. He's trying to present these unrealistic expectations of women. But why is that any different than a man being told he is not good enough and he needs to change? I think that those are unrealistic expectations of a man, to expect him to be emotionally available at all times, to be able to cry, to be able to, break down and talk about emotional things at any point during the day. I think those are unrealistic expectations. And again, I'm not saying that unless you are physically attractive as a woman, you can't be loved. I'm not saying if you are not emotionally available as a man, if you can't cry or talk about emotions, you don't deserve to be loved. I'm just saying there's compromise. And if you are in a relationship that has been together for a long time, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and you get to a point to where you feel like something needs to change, change happens from within. You're not a victim of your circumstances. You're a product of your effort. So you're in a relationship as a female and it's been 10, 15, 20 years and you're not getting the physical attention from your male that you used to, you're not a victim of your circumstances. You're a product of your effort. Maybe you're not making an effort to be physically attractive anymore, and vice versa. If a man is in a relationship 5, 10, 15, 20 years and he doesn't think he's getting laid enough, you're a product of your effort. If you are not giving enough effort to be emotionally available to your wife, that is a turnoff to her. She's not going to want to be physically intimate with you if you are not emotionally intimate with her. It's just this ebb and flow, this constant compromise. You know what I mean? And I think it is a very legitimate argument that men are physical, visual creatures and men are emotional, heartfelt creatures. And we both want different things. I don't know. I feel like it's just even hard to talk about that, even though I think it's 100% true. What do you think?